The radio crackled with pure desperation at 6:30 hours on what should have been a routine Tuesday morning in Afghanistan. "Base, this is Actual 6. We need immediate air support or we're all dead." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, a 20-year Marine veteran who never showed fear. And now he was screaming into his radio with the kind of raw terror that makes your blood freeze. "Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from?" If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. 300 Marines from the 3rd Battalion were trapped in Tangi Valley, completely surrounded by Taliban forces in the largest coordinated ambush our forward operating base had seen in 2 years. Machine gun fire echoed through the communications bunker where I sat monitoring multiple frequencies, watching red dots multiply across our tactical display like a deadly rash spreading across the digital map. "Sir, we've got birds down, wounded everywhere, and they're closing our perimeter," Webb's voice continued, barely audible over the explosive chaos in the background. "Estimate 400 enemy combatants in fortified positions. We won't last another hour without close air support." The only pilot close enough to respond was the one every male aviator in the squadron had been calling the girl who shouldn't be flying for the past 6 months. Captain Zara Hendricks, my 28-year-old sister, sat in the ready room just 50 yards from where I monitored the emergency calls, completely unaware that her career-defining moment was about to arrive through my headset. While I served as a Staff Sergeant Communications Specialist with the 2nd Marine Division, Zara had spent the last 18 months breaking every barrier the Army could throw at a woman trying to master the most lethal helicopter in the American arsenal. The AH-64 Apache isn't just a machine. It's a flying tank armed with 30 cannons, Hellfire missiles, and enough firepower to level city blocks. Most male pilots needed 2 years to achieve combat proficiency, but Zara had mastered every system in 14 months, posting training scores that made seasoned veterans uncomfortable. Our father, retired Colonel James Hendricks, had raised us both with the same philosophy that now seemed prophetic. In war, it doesn't matter who you are or what people think about you. It matters what you can do when everything goes wrong and everyone's counting on you to bring them home. At that moment, with 300 Marines about to become casualties in the worst military disaster since the start of our deployment, everything was definitely going wrong. The question wasn't whether Zara was good enough to fly an Apache in combat. The question was whether she could perform a miracle under conditions that would break most experienced pilots. Captain Brett Kovac, the squadron's self-appointed alpha male, was first to respond to the emergency call. "Tower, hold for real pilots to handle this situation. We don't need practice runs when lives are on the line." His words carried the same condescending tone he'd used every time Zara entered a briefing room, the same dismissive attitude that had made her 6-month deployment feel like a constant audition for a role she'd already earned. But here's what Kovac didn't know, and what I could see clearly from my position monitoring base operations. Every other Apache on the flight line needed at least 45 minutes for combat preparation. Fuel trucks were servicing 2 birds, ammunition loading was incomplete on 3 others, and mechanical issues had grounded the remaining aircraft for routine maintenance. Zara's Apache was the exception. She completed her post-flight maintenance ahead of schedule, topped off fuel reserves during her off-duty hours, and performed ammunition checks with the kind of obsessive precision that separates exceptional pilots from average ones. While other aviators grabbed coffee and complained about mission schedules, Zara treated every aircraft like her personal responsibility, ensuring readiness standards that exceeded regulation requirements. 300 Marines didn't have 45 minutes. Based on the radio chatter flowing through my equipment, they had maybe 20 minutes before Taliban forces overran their defensive positions and turned a rescue mission into a body recovery operation. Forward Operating Base Shank sits like a concrete fortress in Afghanistan's Lagar province, surrounded by mountains that have witnessed centuries of warfare and now watched American forces navigate the complexities of modern combat. The base buzzed with constant activity in August 2014, housing nearly 3,000 personnel from various military branches, all working toward the same impossible goal of bringing stability to a region that seemed allergic to peace. I'd been stationed at Fob Shank for 8 months as Staff Sergeant Ryan Hendricks, managing the central communications hub that connected our base to every military operation within a 100-mile radius. My job involved monitoring 17 different radio frequencies simultaneously, coordinating intelligence between units, and ensuring that information flowed seamlessly between commanders who needed real-time updates to make life-or-death decisions. When Zara's Apache unit received reassignment orders to our base, I felt a mixture of pride and protective concern that only an older brother can understand. She'd completed advanced flight training at Fort Rucker with distinction, mastered complex weapons systems that challenged pilots with decades of experience, and earned her combat designation faster than any pilot in her class. But statistics and achievements meant nothing to the male aviators, who had already decided that women belonged anywhere except behind the controls of America's most lethal attack helicopter. Captain Brett Kovac epitomized everything wrong with military culture's resistance to change. A 12-year Army veteran with legitimate combat experience and an ego that filled every room he entered, Kovac had appointed himself as the unofficial gatekeeper for Apache pilot legitimacy. His comments started subtle during Zara's first week. "Hope you don't mind getting your hands dirty out here, princess." And Apaches got a lot more kick than those training simulators back in Alabama. The other pilots followed Kovac's lead like a pack of insecure teenagers desperate for alpha male approval. Major Tom Chen, normally a professional officer, would smirk whenever Zara entered flight briefings. Lieutenant Jake Morrison made exaggerated shows of helping Zara with equipment she could handle perfectly well herself. Captain Derek Walsh openly questioned whether female pilots had the upper body strength necessary for emergency procedures under combat stress. Their behavior wasn't limited to casual sexism. It escalated into systematic undermining of Zara's confidence and capabilities. During mission briefings, they'd interrupt her tactical suggestions with comments like, "Maybe stick to transport flights until you understand how real combat works." When she demonstrated superior knowledge of Apache systems, they dismiss her expertise as book learning that doesn't translate to actual fighting. The psychological warfare was relentless and calculated. They assigned her the most challenging maintenance schedules, volunteered her for additional duty assignments, and excluded her from informal strategy discussions that happened in the pilot's ready room after official briefings ended. Every mistake, no matter how minor, became evidence that women couldn't handle combat aviation. Every success was dismissed as luck or attributed to favorable conditions. But what they didn't understand about my sister was that adversity had always been her fuel for excellence. Growing up in our military family, Zara had learned early that proving herself required performance levels that exceeded everyone's expectations. Our father, retired Colonel James Hendricks, had spent 30 years in the Army, including 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. He'd raised us both with the understanding that military service demanded absolute dedication, and that respect was earned through competence under pressure, not given based on rank or gender. During one of our weekly video calls with our parents back in Dayton, Ohio, Zara's frustration finally boiled over. "Dad, every mission briefing feels like I'm on trial. They watch my every move, waiting for me to mess up so they can say women don't belong in combat aircraft. I'm flying better than half these guys, but somehow I'm still the one who has to prove myself every single day." Our mother, Patricia Hendricks, had retired after 25 years as a trauma nurse at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Medical Center. She'd seen enough wounded warriors to understand the stakes involved in military aviation, and her response carried the weight of decades watching young people risk everything for their country. "Honey, you've been proving people wrong since you were 5 years old, and insisted on fixing your own bicycle instead of asking for help. Some people need time to catch up with what you already know about yourself." Our father's perspective was more direct. "Zara, competence speaks louder than prejudice, but only if you let your flying do the talking. Don't waste energy fighting their opinions. Invest that energy in being so damn good that their opinions become irrelevant." Despite serving in different capacities on the same base, Zara and I maintained the sibling bond that had sustained us through childhood military moves and deployments that separated our family for months at a time. She'd stop by my communications bunker whenever operational schedules allowed, sharing her frustrations about the constant scrutiny, while I provided her with intelligence updates about regional threats and enemy activity patterns. These conversations became her anchor in an environment where she felt professionally isolated and personally judged. I could see the toll that constant evaluation was taking on her confidence, but I also witnessed her determination to excel despite the hostile environment. She studied Apache technical manuals during off-duty hours, practiced emergency procedures until muscle memory made her responses automatic, and maintained her aircraft with obsessive attention to detail that impressed even the skeptical maintenance crews. What struck me most during those conversations was Zara's refusal to lower her standards or accept mediocrity as sufficient. While other pilots complained about deployment conditions or counted days until rotation home, Zara focused on mastering every aspect of combat aviation. She volunteered for additional training exercises, sought mentorship from senior warrant officers who respected competence over gender, and approached each mission with the understanding that her performance reflected not just on herself, but on every woman who might follow her path. The irony was that while her male colleagues questioned her capabilities, Zara was becoming one of the most technically proficient Apache pilots on the base. Her knowledge of weapons systems exceeded regulation requirements, her understanding of tactical procedures impressed flight instructors, and her dedication to mission preparation set standards that made everyone else look casual by comparison. But in the military culture of 2014, technical excellence wasn't enough to overcome entrenched prejudice. Zara needed an opportunity to demonstrate her abilities under conditions where performance mattered more than politics, where competence could silence criticism, and where her flying could prove what words never could. September 15, 2014, began like every other morning at Forward Operating Base Shank, with the pre-dawn call to prayer echoing across the Afghan mountains and the familiar sounds of military routine filling the crisp desert air. Coffee brewing in the mess hall, generators humming their constant mechanical symphony, and the distant thump of helicopter rotors as maintenance crews performed their daily inspections. None of us knew we were about to witness the deadliest day in our deployment's history. Operation Desert Hawk had been planned for 3 weeks as a routine reconnaissance and clearing mission. Intelligence reports suggested minimal Taliban presence in the Tangi Valley, making it perfect for a large-scale patrol designed to demonstrate American presence in the region while gathering information about suspected weapons caches. The mission parameters seemed straightforward. 300 Marines from the 3rd Battalion would establish temporary patrol bases, conduct house-to-house searches, and return to FOB Shank within 18 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, the battalion commander, had extensive experience leading similar operations throughout Afghanistan. His tactical planning was meticulous, his intelligence briefings comprehensive, and his risk assessment protocols followed every regulation in the military playbook. What he couldn't have anticipated was that Taliban forces had been planning their own operation for months, using American predictability against us in the most sophisticated ambush anyone had seen in the region. From my position in the communications center, I monitored the routine check-ins as Webb's Marines moved through their designated sectors. "Base, this is Actual 6, proceeding to Checkpoint Alpha as scheduled," came through at 5:45 hours. "Base, Checkpoint Alpha secure, moving to Bravo," followed 30 minutes later. Everything proceeded according to plan until 6:30 hours, when routine communication became desperate screaming. "Base, this is Actual 6. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions." Webb's voice exploded through my headset with an intensity that made every person in the communications bunker freeze. The professional calm that defined military radio protocols shattered as background explosions and automatic weapons fire turned his transmission into audio chaos. RPGs, mortars, and small arms fire from elevated positions. We're completely surrounded. The Taliban had orchestrated something unprecedented in its scope and coordination. Nearly 400 fighters had positioned themselves throughout the Tangi Valley over several days, establishing overlapping fields of fire that turned the entire area into a carefully planned killing zone. They'd studied American patrol patterns, identified likely routes, and created a trap that would have challenged even the most experienced military units. Within minutes, my radio frequencies filled with desperate calls from multiple Marine units scattered throughout the valley. We've got wounded who need immediate evacuation. Heavy machine gun positions on the ridgeline. We can't advance or retreat. Base, they're using human shields, civilian families mixed in with combatants. Each transmission painted a clearer picture of a tactical nightmare that threatened to become the worst military disaster of our deployment. The situation deteriorated rapidly as Taliban forces demonstrated tactical sophistication that exceeded intelligence estimates. They'd established command and control positions that coordinated attacks from multiple directions, used mortars to pin down Marine units while small arms fire prevented movement, and employed rocket-propelled grenades to destroy vehicles that provided cover for wounded personnel. Lieutenant Colonel Webb's subsequent transmissions revealed the true scope of the crisis. Base, we have 17 confirmed wounded, multiple vehicles destroyed, and approximately 400 enemy combatants in fortified positions. Request immediate close air support and medical evacuation. We won't survive another hour without air cover. The tactical display in our communications center looked like a digital representation of hell. Red dots representing enemy positions, surrounded blue markers indicating Marine locations, creating a pattern that resembled a deadly flower with American forces trapped in the center. Intelligence officers frantically updated threat assessments, while communications specialists coordinated with higher command to organize rescue operations. When the emergency air support request reached the Apache squadron ready room, Captain Brett Kovac's response embodied everything wrong with military ego under pressure. "Send real pilots for this situation," he announced over the squadron frequency, his voice carrying the same condescending authority he'd used to diminish Zara's contributions for 6 months. "This isn't training exercise material. We need experienced aviators who understand real combat." Other pilots echoed Kovac's sentiment with comments that revealed their priorities focused more on protecting reputations than saving lives. Major Tom Chen suggested waiting for proper mission planning with adequate preparation time. Lieutenant Jake Morrison questioned whether immediate response was tactically sound without comprehensive intelligence briefings. Captain Derek Walsh recommended requesting air support from other bases with more experienced combat pilots. But here's the crucial detail that Kovac and his followers either ignored or didn't understand. Immediate meant immediate. Those 300 Marines didn't have time for proper mission planning, comprehensive intelligence briefings, or requests to other bases. They had minutes before Taliban forces overran their defensive positions and turned a rescue mission into a massacre that would make headlines worldwide. From my position monitoring base operations, I could see the stark reality that escaped the pilots' egos. Every Apache helicopter on the flight line, except one, required extensive preparation before combat deployment. Fuel trucks were servicing aircraft that had returned from previous missions with near-empty tanks. Ammunition loading crews were installing weapons systems on helicopters that had been configured for transport missions. Maintenance teams were performing routine inspections that would take hours to complete safely. The exception was Zara's Apache, designation 27, sitting on the flight line like a caged predator ready for immediate deployment. She'd completed all post-flight maintenance procedures ahead of schedule, ensured fuel reserves exceeded mission requirements, and verified ammunition loads with obsessive attention to detail that other pilots considered unnecessarily perfectionist. While her colleagues grabbed coffee and complained about deployment schedules, Zara had prepared her aircraft for emergency situations that everyone hoped would never occur. The math was brutal and non-negotiable. Other aircraft needed 45 minutes minimum for combat preparation. Based on radio chatter from the valley, those Marines had maybe 20 minutes before their defensive perimeter collapsed, and Taliban forces achieved overwhelming tactical advantage. Every minute spent on pilot politics was a minute closer to writing condolence letters to 300 American families. Lieutenant Colonel Webb's final transmission before communication degraded captured the desperate reality. Base, enemy forces are advancing on our positions from 3 directions. We have wounded who won't survive evacuation delays, and our ammunition is running critically low. Someone needs to get here now, or we're writing letters to 300 families tonight. The moment that would define Zara's entire military career arrived not with fanfare or official orders, but with the sound of her combat boots hitting the communications bunker floor at exactly 6:34 hours. She'd been monitoring emergency frequencies from the Apache ready room and heard every desperate transmission from Lieutenant Colonel Webb's trapped Marines. While other pilots debated protocols and questioned mission parameters, Zara was already moving toward her aircraft with the kind of focused determination that separates heroes from bystanders. "Ryan, I need current enemy positions, weather updates, and flight path clearances to Tangi Valley," she said, her voice carrying none of the uncertainty that had plagued her during months of squadron politics. This was a different Zara than the one who'd endured condescending comments and systematic undermining from her male colleagues. This was Captain Zara Hendricks, Apache pilot, operating at the peak of her training and preparation. I pulled up tactical displays on 3 different screens, feeding her real-time intelligence that painted a grim picture of the battlefield situation. Taliban forces are positioned on elevated terrain at coordinates November 7-4 and November 7-6, with additional concentrations along the eastern ridgeline. Weather is clear, wind from the northwest at 15 knots, visibility unlimited. But Zara, you need to understand what you're flying into. The tactical situation was unlike anything we'd encountered during our deployment. Taliban fighters had established overlapping fields of fire from positions that would challenge even experienced pilots flying in coordinated formations. They'd positioned anti-aircraft weapons in locations that covered multiple approach routes, forcing any rescue attempt through predetermined kill zones where enemy forces held overwhelming advantages. 400 enemy combatants in fortified positions, I continued, highlighting threat locations on the digital map. They've got RPGs, heavy machine guns, and mortars positioned to cover every standard approach vector. Intelligence suggests they've been planning this ambush for months, studying our flight patterns and response procedures. Zara absorbed the information with professional calm that impressed even veteran intelligence officers monitoring our exchange. She asked specific questions about altitude restrictions, civilian population concentrations, and friendly force identification procedures that revealed her understanding of combat complexities that extended far beyond basic flight training. Captain Brett Kovac chose that moment to assert his authority over what he clearly viewed as an insubordination situation developing beyond his control. "Hendricks, stand down immediately," he commanded over the squadron frequency, his voice carrying the expectation of automatic compliance that had defined their working relationship for 6 months. "This mission requires experienced combat pilots with proven track records under fire." Zara's response became legendary among personnel who witnessed the exchange. Without raising her voice or showing any emotional reaction, she keyed her radio and delivered words that would be quoted in military aviation circles for decades. "Captain Kovac, 300 Marines don't have time for your ego or my gender politics. Apache 27 is combat ready and launching immediately." The silence that followed her transmission lasted approximately 3 seconds before multiple voices erupted across squadron frequencies. Major Tom Chen demanded she wait for proper authorization. Lieutenant Jake Morrison questioned her authority to make independent tactical decisions. Captain Derek Walsh suggested she was exceeding her operational parameters and risking court-martial charges. But while other pilots debated regulations and chain-of-command protocols, Zara was already implementing pre-flight procedures with precision that left maintenance crews struggling to keep pace. Sergeant Rodriguez, her crew chief, later described her preparation as unlike anything he'd witnessed in 15 years of military aviation. "Ma'am moved like she was performing surgery and fighting a fire simultaneously. Every switch, every system check, Every ammunition verification was perfect execution in half the normal time. From the communications tower, I watched Zara conduct her pre-flight inspection with methodical efficiency that transformed complex procedures into fluid motion. She verified hydraulic systems, tested electronic warfare equipment, confirmed weapons system functionality, and reviewed flight control responses with the kind of obsessive attention to detail that had made her colleagues dismiss her as overly cautious during peacetime operations. What they'd failed to understand was that Zara's apparent overpreparation during routine missions was actually combat readiness training disguised as perfectionism. Every excessive system check, every redundant safety verification, every extra minute spent on maintenance procedures had been preparing her for exactly this moment, when preparation time would be measured in minutes rather than hours. Tower, this is Apache 27 requesting immediate takeoff clearance for emergency close air support mission, Zara transmitted, her voice carrying professional authority that silenced further debate about her qualifications or decision-making authority. The radio frequency fell quiet as everyone realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in their military experience. Lieutenant Colonel Webb's voice crackled through my headset at that moment, providing context that made further discussion irrelevant. Base, enemy forces are advancing on our positions. We have 17 wounded who won't survive evacuation delays, ammunition running critically low, and defensive perimeter collapsing. Whoever's coming needs to get here in the next 15 minutes or we're all dead. 15 minutes. The other Apache helicopters still needed 40 minutes minimum for combat preparation, assuming no mechanical issues or ammunition loading delays. Simple mathematics had settled the debate about pilot qualifications and gender politics. Competence had become the only relevant qualification, and Zara possessed competence in abundance. As her Apache's engines spooled up to operational power, generating the distinctive whine that announced serious military hardware preparing for combat deployment, Zara's voice came through my headset one final time before takeoff. "Ryan, tell Mom and Dad I'm about to make them proud. And if something goes wrong out there, make sure everyone knows I was ready for this moment." The weight of 300 American lives now rested on her shoulders, along with the future credibility of every woman who might follow her path into combat aviation. Failure would cost those Marines their lives while simultaneously providing ammunition for every argument against women in combat roles. Success would require flying skills, tactical awareness, and combat effectiveness that exceeded anything demonstrated by male pilots under similar conditions. Sergeant Rodriguez completed final weapon system checks, while Zara reviewed tactical approach options that would minimize her exposure to enemy fire while maximizing effectiveness against fortified positions. The margin for error was non-existent, the tactical challenges were unprecedented, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Through my intelligence network, I provided Zara with final updates on enemy positions, weather conditions, and friendly force locations that would guide her tactical decisions once she reached the combat zone. Taliban forces had established sophisticated defensive positions that would challenge multiple aircraft operating in coordinated formations, yet she would be flying alone against overwhelming odds. "Apache 27, you are cleared for immediate takeoff," came the tower authorization that officially launched what would become the most significant combat aviation mission of the entire Afghan conflict. As her helicopter lifted off the flight line and turned toward Tangi Valley, everyone at Forward Operating Base Shank understood they were witnessing either military history in the making or a tragedy that would haunt American forces for years. Apache 27 crested the mountain ridge at 6:52 hours, and what Zara saw through her targeting systems would have sent most pilots into immediate retreat. The Tangi Valley had been transformed into a carefully orchestrated killing field that stretched across 3 square kilometers of Afghan terrain, with Taliban positions established at elevations that provided commanding views of every possible approach route. 400 enemy fighters had turned natural terrain features into fortified positions that would challenge an entire squadron of attack helicopters. Yet Zara was flying alone into the most sophisticated ambush anyone had witnessed during the entire conflict. Through my communications equipment back at Fob Shank, I monitored her initial assessment as she surveyed the tactical nightmare spread below her aircraft. Base, this is 2-7. Taliban forces are positioned in overlapping defensive layers with heavy weapons concentrated on ridgelines. Marine positions are scattered across the valley floor with no clear extraction routes. This is going to require something unprecedented. The Marine situation had deteriorated significantly during the 18 minutes required for Zara to reach their location. Lieutenant Colonel Webb's final coherent transmission painted a picture of complete tactical breakdown. 2-7, we have 23 wounded, ammunition down to final magazines, and enemy forces advancing on our positions from 3 directions. Whatever you're planning, it needs to happen in the next 5 minutes, or we're writing letters to families tonight. What happened next defied every tactical manual in military aviation and established combat procedures that would be studied at the Army Aviation School for decades. Standard protocol for close air support in complex terrain required multiple aircraft operating in coordinated formations, extensive reconnaissance to identify enemy positions, and careful coordination with ground forces to avoid friendly fire incidents. Zara had none of these advantages, and all of the disadvantages that should have made success impossible. The Taliban had positioned heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenade launchers at strategic locations that covered traditional attack vectors, forcing any aircraft into predetermined kill zones where concentrated fire would overwhelm even advanced defensive systems. They'd established command and control positions that coordinated attacks from multiple directions, used civilian structures to complicate targeting decisions, and created overlapping fields of fire that eliminated safe approach routes. But what the Taliban hadn't anticipated was encountering a pilot who understood that impossible situations required impossible solutions. Zara executed what military historians would later classify as the most complex single-aircraft combat maneuver in modern warfare, a tactical innovation that combined elements from different combat disciplines into something entirely new. She initiated what became known as the Hendricks maneuver by diving her Apache below the ridgeline, using mountainous terrain to mask her approach, while simultaneously analyzing enemy positions through advanced targeting systems that most pilots used for straightforward engagements. Flying at speeds that pushed her aircraft beyond recommended safety parameters, she identified 47 separate enemy positions while maintaining altitudes that kept her invisible to Taliban observation posts. The precision required was extraordinary. Apache helicopters are designed for devastating firepower, not surgical accuracy in complex urban environments where enemy combatants were mixed with civilian populations. Zara needed to neutralize military threats while avoiding casualties among non-combatants who were being used as human shields, all while operating alone in terrain that provided Taliban forces with overwhelming tactical advantages. At 6:58 hours, she executed the most audacious military aviation maneuver anyone had witnessed during the entire Afghan conflict. Rising above the ridgeline at a predetermined coordinate where Taliban forces had established their primary command position, Zara engaged 12 separate targets simultaneously, while her aircraft performed a controlled rotation that provided firing solutions for weapons systems designed for sequential rather than coordinated deployment. Her 30 cannon eliminated machine gun positions with precision that surgeons would have envied, while Hellfire missiles destroyed mortar emplacements and rocket launcher positions with accuracy that left enemy forces unable to coordinate defensive responses. In the span of 90 seconds, she neutralized the command and control structure that had coordinated the entire ambush while simultaneously creating escape routes for trapped Marines. But the most remarkable aspect of her performance was what happened next. Instead of withdrawing to assess damage and coordinate follow-up attacks, Zara maintained her position above the valley and continued engaging enemy forces with tactical awareness that allowed her to provide cover for Marine evacuation procedures while preventing Taliban reinforcements from reaching battle positions. Lieutenant Colonel Webb's voice exploded through my headset with disbelief and overwhelming relief. 2-7, I don't know what you just accomplished, but you turned hell into heaven. Enemy fire has ceased across all positions, and we have clear egress routes for wounded evacuation. You just saved every Marine in this valley. The tactical display in our communications center showed the results of Zara's 23-minute engagement. 47 enemy positions neutralized, 12 heavy weapons emplacements destroyed, and coordinated ambush structure completely dismantled. More importantly, she'd accomplished this without a single civilian casualty despite Taliban forces using human shield tactics throughout their defensive positions. Marine Corporal Marcus Davis, one of the wounded who survived because of Zara's intervention, later provided testimony that captured the emotional impact of her performance. I watched that Apache dancing between mountains like it was choreographed by angels. Whoever was flying that bird wasn't just good, they were supernatural. Every shot was perfect, every maneuver was exactly what we needed, and somehow they knew where we were and where the bad guys were without any mistakes. The statistics were unprecedented in modern combat aviation. Single aircraft, single pilot, 47 enemy positions neutralized in 23 minutes without civilian casualties or friendly fire incidents. These numbers would have been impressive for multiple aircraft operating in coordinated formations with extensive intelligence support and favorable tactical conditions. What Zara accomplished while flying alone into an ambush designed to destroy multiple aircraft became the standard against which combat aviation effectiveness was measured. Her tactical innovation combined precision flying with weapons system mastery and tactical awareness that exceeded anything demonstrated by pilots with decades more experience. The radio chatter from rescued Marines provided real-time validation of her effectiveness. "Base, this is Alpha Squad. We're moving wounded to Extraction Point Alpha without enemy contact." "Base, Bravo Squad reports clear movement to evacuation zone. No hostile fire from previously engaged positions." "Base, Charlie Squad confirms enemy withdrawal from all observed positions." At 7:21 hours, Apache 27 completed its combat mission and began its return flight to forward operating base Shank, leaving behind a tactical situation that had been completely transformed through individual excellence under impossible conditions. 300 Marines were alive because one pilot had refused to accept that gender politics mattered more than combat competence. The silence on squadron frequencies during Zara's return flight spoke louder than any congratulations could have expressed. Everyone understood they had witnessed something unprecedented in military aviation, a performance that redefined expectations for single aircraft combat effectiveness and eliminated every argument about women's capabilities in combat roles. Apache 27 touched down on forward operating base Shank's flight line at 7:43 hours to a scene that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. Ground crews, maintenance personnel, intelligence officers, and support staff had gathered in unprecedented numbers to watch Zara's return from what everyone understood had been a mission that would define military aviation history. The usual post-flight procedures were abandoned, as people simply stood in respectful silence, watching a pilot who had just accomplished the impossible climb down from her aircraft. Captain Brett Kovac was waiting beside her helicopter when she completed her shutdown checklist, and his presence there represented something far more significant than a simple debriefing. For 6 months, he'd embodied everything wrong with military culture's resistance to change, using his position and influence to systematically undermine Zara's confidence and capabilities. Now he stood there looking like a man who'd been forced to confront the complete inadequacy of his prejudices. His words were broadcast over the open squadron frequency, ensuring that everyone who had heard his previous dismissive comments would witness this moment of accountability. "Hendricks, I owe you an apology that'll take the rest of my career to make up for. What you accomplished out there wasn't just exceptional flying. That was military aviation at its absolute peak. I was wrong about everything, and those 300 Marines are alive because you're a better pilot than any of us." The transformation in squadron dynamics was immediate and permanent. Major Tom Chen, who had spent months questioning Zara's tactical knowledge, approached her with genuine respect and asked for detailed briefings on the combat maneuvers she'd developed. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, who had made condescending offers to help, with equipment she handled perfectly well, now sought her mentorship on advanced weapons systems procedures. Captain Derek Walsh, who had openly doubted women's physical capabilities in combat aviation, requested permission to observe her training sessions. But the changes extended far beyond personal attitudes within the squadron. Within 48 hours of her mission, senior commanders from multiple bases were requesting copies of her after-action reports, tactical analyses, and combat video footage. The Hendricks maneuver became required study material at the Army Aviation School at Fort Rucker, where instructors used her engagement as the definitive example of single aircraft effectiveness in complex combat environments. 3 days after the mission, our weekly video call with our parents back in Dayton took on significance that none of us had anticipated. Our father, retired Colonel James Hendricks, had been contacted by former colleagues throughout the military who wanted to express their admiration for his daughter's performance. His emotional response revealed the depth of pride he felt not just as a father, but as a career military officer who understood the historical significance of what Zara had accomplished. "Zara, your grandfather served in 3 wars and earned more decorations than most people see in a lifetime," he said, his voice carrying emotions that 30 years of military discipline couldn't suppress. "But if he could see what you did in that valley, he'd be so proud that the entire state of Ohio would hear him celebrating. You didn't just save those Marines. You proved that excellence has no gender boundaries." Our mother's reaction was equally profound, but approached from her perspective as a medical professional who had spent decades treating wounded warriors. "Honey, I've seen too many young people come through our trauma center because someone wasn't skilled enough or brave enough to do what needed to be done. 23 families still have their sons because you were exactly where you needed to be when it mattered most." The formal recognition came 10 days later when Zara became the first female Apache pilot to receive the Distinguished Flying Cross for combat action. The ceremony at FOB Schenck drew senior officers from throughout the region, including the commanding general, who had initially questioned the wisdom of assigning women to combat aviation roles. His comments during the award presentation captured the broader implications of her achievement. "Captain Hendricks has demonstrated that combat effectiveness is measured by competence, courage, and commitment to mission success. Her performance has permanently changed how we evaluate pilot capabilities and has established standards that will challenge every aviator regardless of gender." But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the Marines she had saved. They organized an informal gathering where each person shared their perspective on how her intervention had affected their lives. Marine Corporal Marcus Davis spoke for the group. "Ma'am, we understand that proving yourself as a female pilot meant everything to you. But we need you to know that to us, you weren't the female pilot who saved our lives. You were the best pilot any of us had ever seen in action." The long-term impact of Zara's mission extended far beyond individual recognition or career advancement. When new female pilots arrived at Forward Operating Base Schenck 18 months later, they encountered an environment completely transformed from the hostile reception Zara had endured. Male aviators welcomed them as colleagues rather than questioning their qualifications. Squadron commanders assigned missions based on competence rather than gender assumptions, and training opportunities were distributed fairly rather than being used as tools for discrimination. Zara's personal growth through this experience became evident during our conversations in the months following her mission. The uncertainty and self-doubt that had characterized her early deployment had been replaced by quiet confidence that came from knowing she had been tested under the most extreme conditions possible and had exceeded every expectation. "That day taught me something I'll never forget," she reflected during one of our late-night conversations in the communications bunker. "Competence speaks louder than prejudice, but only if you're willing to let your performance do all the talking. I spent months trying to argue my way into acceptance, when what I really needed was an opportunity to prove what I could accomplish when everything was on the line." Her tactical innovations continued to influence combat aviation long after our deployment ended. The precision engagement techniques she developed became standard procedures for close air support in complex environments. Her decision-making process under extreme pressure became a case study taught to senior military leaders. Her maintenance and preparation standards became the benchmark against which other pilots measured their own readiness levels. The most lasting legacy of September 15, 2014, wasn't just that Zara had saved 300 Marines through exceptional flying skills and tactical brilliance. She had permanently altered military culture by demonstrating that when lives hang in the balance, the only qualification that matters is the ability to perform when failure means death for people counting on you to bring them home. 5 years later, when I was promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned to train new communications specialists, I always shared Zara's story during leadership discussions. Not as an example of overcoming gender discrimination, but as proof that excellence under pressure reveals character in ways that peacetime evaluations never can. Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't made with words. It's made with 30 cannons, precision flying, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are when everything depends on what you can do.